Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Andrea Gonzalez with Trellis Strategies, and you have tuned in today to our 3 o'clock panel, and this is one of our 3 panels for our Solutions Summit. Our discussion series began in October. I just want to do a quick summary of the different topics we have hit on. In October, we started with data conversation, who pauses their education and why. In November, we talked about trust, expectations, and outcomes of post-secondary education. In December, we spoke in person about student-ready institutions, processes, and programs. And last month in January, we talked about who doesn't start post-secondary education and why. Today, we are bringing together all of these topics about obstacles to continuing post-secondary education and turning it around and talking about solutions. We're done talking about the obstacles. We want to move forward and talk today about various paths to progressing with post-secondary education. So I will hand it over to our president and CEO, Dr. Debra Chromy.
Thanks, Andrea. And again, thanks for all your work on pulling together this fabulous panel. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Trellis 360 Solutions Summit or for staying with us for the second hour. My name is Debra Chromy. As Andrea mentioned, I'm President and CEO here at Trellis. We're based in Round Rock, Texas. And again, very pleased to see that so many folks have joined us today. For those of you who are first-timers, the Trellis 360 series was started a couple of years ago to bring together industry leaders for thought-provoking discussions on today's higher education and workforce landscape. Our first series focused on the value of post-secondary education and was so well received, we started this second series on barriers to completion. Our goal with these series is that participants gain invaluable insights, share in discussion, and network with like-minded professionals. So I'm very excited for today's Solution Summit, which, as Andrea mentioned, wraps up this second series on barriers to completion, but focused on solutions. Our second panel today is another very timely topic, which is alternative credential pathways. We have 3 fabulous panelists today. First is Kasey Klepfer. He's Senior Research and Policy Analyst in the Office of Academic Affairs at the University of Texas. In this role, Kasey supports strategic priorities for the Office of Academic Affairs through data analysis, research, policy development, and institutional support. And I do have to say, just for transparency, before he went to UT, Kasey worked here at Trellis, and he led the design and implementation of the nationwide Student Financial Wellness Survey, which is still going strong. Next up is Katharine McAden. Thank you, Katharine, for being with us. She is Head of Public Policy and External Affairs South for Google. She's very proud to represent Google's external and policy efforts here in South Central US, based in the heart of the Lone Star State. I won't talk about your particular preferences in terms of teams. I don't want to start something here today, but Katharine has over 20 years in the Texas political arena and is proud to advocate for freedom, energy, and now information. So thank you, Katharine. And then Ray Martinez, very pleased to have you with us today. Ray serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, TAC. TAC is a comprehensive membership association comprising a diverse mix of 48 community colleges across the state of Texas. So again, thank you all for being here. I think we're going to have a fabulous conversation. We have great expertise here on this call. So I'm going to start with a very high-level general question for all of you. So data, we know, continually shows that the earning potential of people who have a post-secondary credential is higher than those who don't. However, the value of a post-secondary education credential is still being called into question. It could have to do with the student debt issue. I'm sure Kasey has other thoughts from a research perspective on this, but in any case, we have people who are not willing to settle in and go for 4 years of education for a number of reasons. In addition, we have 40 million people across this country, and I know a little over 4 million of those are here in Texas, that have some college but no credential. At the same time, business is booming here in Texas. Industry is moving here, company headquarters are relocating, and then all their suppliers are coming along with them. We also have, I think the last stat I heard is 1 million people a day, not a million, sorry, 1,000 people a day are moving to Texas. It seems post-secondary education is primed for evolution. And there certainly is an appetite for alternative credit obtainment. And I believe that we're already starting to see that transformation take place, really looking at education as no longer a linear event. It isn't just people going to high school, going to 4 years of college and getting a job, right? That is changing quite a bit. And Ray, you can probably provide more details on this, but it's my understanding across the country, there are more adults enrolled in higher education or post-secondary education than there are 17 and 18-year-olds. So from all of that, I'd love to hear from each one of you your definition of sort of alternative credentials and how you're involved with them in your organization or how you're seeing that move forward. And since I've been calling on Ray, I'm going to ask him to start us off.
Happy to do so, Deborah. First of all, thank you to Trellis Strategies for having me on this panel. It's a great panel. Katharine, I'm very familiar with the great work she's been doing, Kasey as well. And I'm really just so pleased to be a part of this discussion. And we started this panel discussion talking about or focusing on solutions, and I think that is definitely very appropriate for this discussion. From a community college perspective, here in Texas, our 50 community colleges are undergoing a very transformative period. And I know that this conversation will be more focused on alternative credential pathways, of course, but you can't separate anything that we're doing right now at our community colleges across Texas from this really significant and very historic bill that was passed last session, which we call HB 8, or which is House Bill 8, that we are now 8.5 months into implementation. It was signed into law by Governor Abbott on June the 9th of 2023 of last year, and we very quickly went into full implementation mode across all 50 of our community colleges. And I think, as a sort of a grounding to start this conversation, at least from, again, the community college perspective, it is to amplify the importance of what this bill does for these alternative credential pathways at our institutions. Community colleges across Texas already provide, first of all, let me put on my former hat as Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs at the Courting Board. I want to champion all sectors of higher education here in Texas. We have the very best public four-year institutions, the very best community colleges, independent colleges. Our technical colleges and Lamar institutions are fantastic. There's a lot to be proud of here in the state of Texas in terms of our post-secondary quality and excellence. From a community college perspective, we've traditionally offered traditional academic degree programs, of course, primarily associate degrees, though a growing number of our community colleges are offering bachelor degrees in applied disciplines, but primarily academic associate degrees, workforce education, credit-bearing workforce education certificates and credentials, level 1 certificates, level 2 certificates, occupational skills awards, and then our continuing education portfolio, which has been around for our colleges for a number of years, these short-term reskilling, upskilling opportunities that are done in very close partnership with local business and industry. I grew up in Alice, Texas, down in South Texas. Del Mar College has an array of continuing education course offerings, a lot of it in partnership with the petrochemical industry prevalent there in the Gulf Coast region, of course. That is all very important. It's been a part of our course and program offerings for many years now. The game changer here for HB 8, there's a lot that we could digest with regard to HB 8, and I know, again, we won't go down that pathway in too much detail, but I will say that making these short-term non-credit-bearing credentials, these alternative credential pathways, as a fundable outcome. There has been some state funding through contact hours in the past for these non-credit-bearing courses, but now under this new funding model where we've transformed our state appropriations funding for community colleges to one that is 100% based upon outcomes and performance, essentially, these short-term credentials become fundable outcomes. And we can talk in our discussion about what that means exactly, but it means that you're going to see and are already seeing 8.5 months into implementation, a big change in terms of the emphasis that our colleges place upon these alternative credential pathways, the importance of funding under the Skills Development Fund and JET grants and so forth for increasing capacity for these short-term credentials. So there's a lot to be said here, Debra, and again, I don't want to dominate the first question, but to say I'm excited to have this conversation, and there's so much going on in this space, hard to cover in just a 30 or 45-minute conversation, but a lot going on in the community college sector. So thank you for having me.
Oh, great. Ray, and I'm going to ask you just to summarize really quickly. We have people on the call from all over the country. Mm-hmm. So just you alluded to it, but I just want you to summarize what House Bill 8 does, just so everybody's on the same page. Yeah,
the very, very short version is House Bill 8 moves us away from a funding formula that had been in place for the last 50 years that was largely based upon contact hours or tied to enrollment, if you will, for our 50 community colleges, and it moved us to an outcomes-based model. What are those metrics that the state is funding? It would be credentials of value in high-demand fields, transfer. So when a student does 15 semester credit hours at a community college and transfers to one of our public four-year institutions like UT Austin, that is a fundable outcome for the community college. And dual credit. When a student does 15 semester credit hours of dual credit at a community college, that is considered a fundable outcome. And then there are three sort of plus subcategories. The more we do with regard to conferring a credential for economically disadvantaged students, academically disadvantaged students, and adult learners, the more funding and general appropriations comes to our colleges. That, in a nutshell, is the heart of HB 8.
Great. Thanks, Ray. I appreciate that summary. I'm going to turn to you now, Katharine, and for you to talk about your experience, what you're seeing at Google, and then more generally with everything else you're involved in here in Texas.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, Debra and Andrea. Ray, I'm so glad you're on this, because if you haven't already written the book on this topic, I'm sure you will in the next 10 years. And we couldn't be here functioning as well as we are without the incredible work done by UT system. And definitely huge credit to Chancellor Milliken and Vice Chancellor Holmes, who we've worked very closely with on this topic. So again, Katharine McAden with Google. I'm based in Texas, and I get to do policy work. For a long time, Google has had a program called Grow with Google, where we invest heavily and work heavily on short-term career credentials, the very credentials that Ray was mentioning. We have a number of different platforms, that programs that can be completed in average 3 to 6 months for a very affordable rate. It started out more working with nonprofits and at-risk communities and really bringing it access to education for communities that wouldn't have initially had access. But through Texas, it's really grown into a whole new opportunity because of Ray and DCB and UT System and a number of others, because they've recognized the opportunity for a whole-scale workforce solution to address upcoming workforce needs. So as AI comes into the communities, as businesses are digitally transforming, we at Google recognize that there's an opportunity and a responsibility to update people and help train populations with really incredible work through career credentials. So anything from cybersecurity to digital analytics to IT support, excuse me, even industry-based credentials. Let's say it's healthcare credentials for IT support, or data analytics for finance, or working in the public sector, streamlining government agencies. I think there's a real opportunity and partnership that we've been able to launch in Texas and across the nation with these short-term credentials.
Great. Thanks, Katharine. And then Kasey, from your perspective at AT and the research work you do for the Office of Academic Affairs, can you talk a little bit about what this means for UT?
Sure. And thank you for having me. I think your choice of words of evolution is really appropriate, because sometimes in higher education, we think that things turn into a butterfly. But in reality, I think there's been work done, since the Great Recession about data collecting on workforce outcomes and trying to understand the true value of a college degree. And I think that what we learned during that time is that while these credentials absolutely were valuable, there was variability, and that variability often focused on underserved students. It often was students that were post-traditional, that were working, had families, dropped in and out. We learned things about different programs of study and how their outcomes might, in 10 years, be really, really good financial return on investment. But in the first couple years, those wages were just low, and they needed support. And you were seeing, so it really was the work of, Trellis, national organizations, and just research shops on trying to understand this for a long time. And so in 2021, Chancellor Milliken launched Texas Credentials for the Future. And it's an understanding that the evolution of higher education is one where students are going to have to come back and reskill and upskill, because these fields are changing so fast. It's also recognition that by using workforce data and understanding how students are their success after college, you can support programs with specific skills. So a broadly educated education and a specifically skilled in things that will support them, particularly 1 to 3 years after graduation. So under that umbrella of Texas Credentials for the Future, we work with Google, and Katharine has been an amazing partner. We work with Strata Foundation. We work with the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, where we're really trying to build a capacity and an understanding and a plan for credit for prior learning for those students, that may not have a degree, so that they can count some of the actual real life experience for credit bearing courses. And I think that umbrella of work is really important, and I think it connects with student success very well. I mean, we know that if you can get students some actually experience in their major early, it builds. We know that it helps with retention and graduation. And so I think that micro-credentialing, which is what Texas Credentials for the Future is focused on providing our students through partnerships with Google, Coursera, and offering free of charge to our 250,000 students an opportunity to get specifically skilled. It is great student success work, and it's also something that's, I think, we haven't been able to communicate as well as we wanted to between institutions and industry. And I think credentialing is a really nice way to have that communication solidified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And Kasey, I think making micro-credentials available, certainly we want people to come into the UT system, do 4 years and graduate. But should something happen and they drop out or have to take a break, at least they have a credential that is going to earn them a real, livable wage, right? Until such time that they're able to get back in, if they want to, back into education.
Yeah, and like I was saying, I think this concept has been around for a long time. I mean, there's the historic work with UTEP and El Paso Community College of thinking about reverse transfer is a perfect example of building credentials on the pathway to a bachelor's degree. And I'm only glad that since then, partnerships with community colleges and industry has gotten even better.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring Ray and then Katharine in and sort of ask a question around. So it's been explained to me recently, Ray, and you can counter this if I'm wrong, that certain things, industry, technology is moving really fast. And by the time you're able to get a new course put together, get accredited, go through the accreditation process, et cetera, it might be outdated. So to that extent, thinking about whether it's micro-credentials or even apprenticeships, to something I think Kasey touched on around when people can feel it, experience it, know what it is. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at TAC, as well as some community college examples of how you're moving forward on both of those fronts?
Yeah, I think, it's a strong focus for us here at TAC. Our association, we are a nonprofit association. We have about 15 full-time employees here, and half of our full-time employees work with what we call the Texas Success Center. And our Success Center, I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with it, is very focused on ensuring that we can increase student success from many different angles, whether it is intensive academic advising or other strategies that we know can help students along the pathway to make sure that they stay on track towards some sort of a credential. What you said earlier about students that might sort of swirl in and out of higher ed resonates. I'm the father of 2 kids in college right now. And so any kind of badging or credentialing that they can have along the way in case those life interruptions do occur. And for one of my kids, I won't identify which one, that is there, he or she is susceptible to that. I'm going to stay real vague on that. And so those are important. These are really important advancements or really important things that are happening in the higher education space. I think Chancellor Milliken and others deserve a lot of credit for the work that they've done with Katharine, with Grow with Google, and some of the badging and micro-credentialing that is available to students who are in the UT system or one of the campuses for UT system. So with regard to our community colleges, again, we do need to be able to have the flexibility to respond quickly to industry and business needs. And that is a challenge. Texas is the fastest growing state in the country and has been for the last 14 years. When we got the decennial census numbers in the summer of 2000, we were already the state that had grown the most out of every other state in the country. And every year that the Census Bureau updates the numbers, we're seeing the same trend. People are moving to Texas, and that's great. I think a lot of the folks, a lot of it is fueled by domestic migration. A lot of folks do come with a skill set, but some don't. Mm-hmm. And we need to be able to have a higher education infrastructure, not just our community and technical colleges, but our partners in our four-year institutions to be able to respond to those business and industry needs. And one of the things, I was on a panel this morning in San Antonio, actually, with 2 community college presidents, one from Southwest Texas College and one from Grayson College, which is up in the North Texas area. And both of them commented on the fact that with the change in the funding model and the fact that we now have greater certainty over our funding for our community colleges with this new funding model, that it has allowed them to be able to do much more planning. In the past, they had to see what was going on 2 years in a look-back model and then hope that things would work out in the next legislative session and then hope their enrollment grew and maybe they'd get a slice of the pie that would help them to plan accordingly for some of these short-term programs. That's not the case anymore. Now we have a much more budget certainty. And it's not a question of did my college grow versus some of the larger urban or suburban colleges. Now it's a question of did my college produce the outcomes that are in statute, essentially in HB, that are now codified through HB 8. All of that is very exciting. I know in talking to Dr. Siddhartha at EPCC at El Paso Community College, he's very proud of the fact that they have great partnerships, of course, with UTEP around transfer and other academic programs. But he also equally is proud of the fact that, they're one of the local hospitals in El Paso has come to EPCC to say, can you help us to create patient care specialists? Let's take folks that are enrolled in phlebotomy, non-credit bearing phlebotomy certifications or EKG technicians or certified nurse assistants. And let's see if we can create pathways that allow them to come to our hospital as a patient care technician or patient care specialist. We will help fund that. We will guarantee them a job at the end of that outcome. Those are the outcomes that we want to see flourish. And we believe from a community college perspective that we're going to see and are already seeing an increase in those types of pathways. And by the way, as a quick footnote, we also need to build that scaffolding to allow for credentials that are on the non-credit bearing side, that students through prior learning assessment or competency-based education, that they can actually be able to get that non-credit bearing experience and move it over to a credit bearing courses if they decide to move up the ladder in the healthcare industry, for example. So I'm being a bit wordy, but hopefully that addresses some of what you're asking, Debra.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. And I want Katharine to jump in here more from an industry perspective, if you could, around how you're viewing this, and certainly creating the programs that you have at Google. You saw a need or a niche and went in to fill that. But can you talk a little bit, to the extent that you're doing partnerships with higher ed and what those look like, and how you're moving that forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the bottom line is career-ready skills are everything. At the pace the world is changing right now. 2 years ago, we wouldn't have thought that AI was going to be a thing. Now it's incorporated into every major Fortune 500 company that exists. And it's not slowing down. Cybersecurity and lots of work on hacking and foreign interference and all sorts of technologies require skilled workforce that's available right now. Texas specifically is really fortunate that we have the population here that's able and ready. And we also have a lot of transitioning industries that are major industries that are adopting technology at a faster and faster rate. And so we see a unique niche with tech, with Google, with our engineers who come up with crazy, wild, amazing, brilliant dreams to be able to share some of that knowledge with other communities. So we work very closely with our growth Google team would kill me. I'm supposed to know the number of community college partners we have across the nation, but it's by far our largest population of partners incorporating in credit and non-credit courses. And it really depends individually on each organization on how we're partnering. We try to be as flexible as possible to meet the needs. Our partnership with UT System was also a landmark, huge university integration with many, many campuses within UT System. And each one has a little bit different take to make sure it aligns with their knowledge and skill set. Our first priority, our bread and butter is not education. We love education. We have some brilliant people, but we rely on our partners to identify how it best fits and it helps address skill set needs or teacher gaps that are on the ground level. I will say specifically with careers, I mentioned it vaguely earlier, but with reskilling and upskilling, we saw specific needs, and it's Google, so of course it's data driven, and a specific need in those industry-based specializations. So like I mentioned before, and Ray kind of alluded, IT support in healthcare, phlebotomists in healthcare, that sort of healthcare narrative, there's a lot in that world. If it's public sector processing, data analytics, how are we going to get constituent information out and people served? If it's finance world, increasingly, that's always been pretty heavy in tech, but it's definitely an increasing demand. So I think we really try to listen on the ground and see what is needed and what's helpful, and then respond with what we can deliver. Our most recent career certificate in cybersecurity actually came as a direct result of a job of employers looking for qualified cybersecurity analysts that would be able to fill jobs, live jobs.
That's great, Katharine. Thank you for that. And then Kasey, if you can jump in and talk about from your perspective or from the side at UT, and I don't mean for you to represent all of UT. I know you're in academic affairs and research, but to the extent that you've started to take a look at that data and what you're seeing, or is it too early to sort of assess the impact that this is having?
Well, I mean, part of this Texas Credentials for the Future plan is to assess some of these things, but there are things we already know. And from work from Google, Grow with Google, and what is now Lightcast, used to be Burning Glass, we know that certain majors and programs of study, you can improve that first year earnings by 30 to 40% with some of these micro credentials. So there's already some data around value. What we're tracking right now is the growth of all these programs. So we're offering to students and alumni and faculty and staff opportunities through Coursera to take a variety of micro credentials. Grow with Google is by far our biggest right now. So we have so in a year and a half, we've done 350 data analytics certificates, project management's about 150, and these are all in pilot stage, and they're growing and growing. So what we want to make sure we're looking at is workforce outcomes and try to understand how these things add to it. But we already know a lot, and what we know is that being able to demonstrate having a specific skill that's in demand is going to make you more marketable, and will increase those first year earnings. And we also know that a lot of these skills are being taught at our community colleges and universities already. And so building opportunities for faculty and staff to build their own badges and micro credentials and be able to really do what we've been talking about for 15 years is help a student have a portfolio. But what used to be this portfolio that we're encouraging students to build of their skills, now we can link that to actual industry in-demand skills. We can have industries certify these micro credentials, and through all these partnerships, things I hope will become a lot easier for students, particularly first-generation students, to be able to articulate the skills that they've learned in college.
Right. Ray,
Debra,
you want to jump in there?
Just one quick footnote about this, and that is that, with regard to the rulemaking that's going on for our community college sector to implement House Bill 8, one of the changes that that is currently being proposed by the coordinating board, our higher education authority here in Texas, for a change to FY25 funding. So, HB8 was passed last year, and the first round of funding for FY24 was done, and it was done based upon the outcomes-based criteria. But then we're seeing some changes for the coming fiscal year that will continue to sort of improve the formula and be responsive to the college. One of the changes that is being proposed is to make third-party credentials fundable outcomes. So again, I talked about the primary metrics that are part of the formula, but what the coordinating board is proposing through rulemaking wouldn't require legislative approval necessarily, but because it is part in the spirit of HB8. So they'll do it through the rulemaking process, and that is any third-party credential that is recognized by the American Council on Education, and I think Grow with Google is in that category. In partnership with a community college, that would become a fundable outcome under HB8. Again, these are game changers for our community colleges. We already have strong partnerships, as Katharine mentioned, with third-party credential providers like Grow with Google. This is going to incentivize it even further, and that's good for students.
If I can jump in, sorry. One of the things that fascinates me in our team is, Lisa Gavelba, our founder of Grow with Google, who is based in Mountain View, but has been in Texas a lot and co-hosting panels talking about this very topic, and the magic of the recipe that's happening in Texas is how landmark this conversation is and how incredible it is to have the Higher Education Coordinating Board, TEA, major universities, community colleges, the governor, state legislators, all of these groups together and aligned in this issue. I mean, it was a wholesale change in regulatory oversight of higher education, essentially, that passed in a year and a half, 2 years. It shows a huge credit to the work and the momentum and the forethought of leaders in the state. And we're really, just from a global perspective, excited to work with other states and nations on similar efforts, for sure.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go, Katharine. So this is happening at the state level in Texas, and I know there are other states that are at various levels of similar types of implementation. But at the federal level, so what we're doing here in Texas, and Ray, if you're right, and they allow those to be seen as outcomes, because certainly if you get a cyber certificate credential and you're able to get employed, and those jobs are earning some good salaries. This is, nothing to sneeze at here. Even though they don't have a 2-year or 4-year degree, those should be viewed as eligible for other types of federal aid as well. So I'm just curious, Katharine, and I know I'm completely shooting off the hip here from you, but have you heard any conversation around this and what might be possible? I know they've talked about extending Pell Grants for short-term credentials, but other types of aid as well.
That's a really good question. And I think, honestly, since we weren't together in DC lobbying for this, you can probably say it better than I could. But I will say, while I'm not familiar with the updates on Pell Grants, I know a number of legislators are pushing for extensions referencing work in Texas and others. I think a couple of Texas senators are interested in that conversation, definitely. There is a lot of advocacy on the national level from organizations like Business Roundtable, Business Higher Education Forum, that have launched work programs in various states as federal sort of advocacy efforts to align. I will also say that on a broader scale, when we're talking about governments and institutions, I think it takes a vision on the ground to be able to make it possible in DC. So we hope that, and always continue to hope that there will be really strong efforts. And honestly, I'm candid in saying I haven't watched the feds in the last 6 months. I try to stick to Texas and cover my ears sometimes. But if you have any information, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I know that we're working closely with Business Higher Ed Forum and BRT on definite advocacy efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I wanted to circle back to something that Ray said, because I did have a question and you sort of answered it, which is ACE, sort of certified credentials, if you will, because my fear is there are a lot of credentials out there, and who do you go to know that this is, a credential of value? And so you all are relying on ACE for that. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that is the proposal from the coordinating board. I think that I don't want to speak for all 50 of our community college presidents and chancellors because we haven't had a chance to fully digest that issue. But I sense a comfort level that there would be that requirement that a third-party credential would be recognized by ACE. So yeah, I think that is. That's where we're at on this. These changes are actually rules that are currently published in the Texas Register. It's a comment period right now that actually ends on Sunday. So we're digesting the rules. We've had good conversations with Commissioner Keller and his staff so that we can better understand some of the proposals. But again, one of those key proposals is to make these third-party credentials fundable. The only other thing I would add, when you all were talking about short-term Pell, we're very supportive of bipartisan efforts. Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member Bobby Scott have both been supportive of short-term Pell legislation at the federal level. We support that. Well, we hope it does happen. But one related issue that already did happen with HB 8 was TEOG, Texas Education Opportunity Grant Program, is our Pell equivalent for students that attend our Texas community colleges. They have to demonstrate financial need through their FAFSA or TAFSA. And so one change that we made through HB 8 was to allow our community colleges to package TEOG to students who are enrolled in non-credit bearing short-term credential programs. That is a very key change that we can, and we increased funding, by the way, for TEOG dramatically. So that we can extend funding to about 70% of eligible students across our community colleges. We were down at about 28% on average before the legislature increased funding for TEOG in 2023 through HB 8. These alone, like if these were just standalone bills, these would be so dramatic and game changers that they're in a package of HB 8, which does so much. We haven't even touched upon the funding for increased capacity in workforce education and so forth. There's so much there. It's all very exciting. So anyway, I'll get off my HB 8 soapbox now, Deborah.
No, that's great.
It's worth it.
Yeah, it is. It's a good one. And I can't wait to read the book also. I don't know which one of you is going to write it, but it's going to be a great book. I will go back to something you said, Ray, and then I'm going to bring Kasey in as well. And that is about these alternative pathways, and in particular, looking at whether it's phlebotomists or others that have sort of a basic job, and being able to get them into a pathway that increases their education, maybe employer paid, et cetera, that allows them to move up in that direction. One of the things, Kasey, I'm going to pull you back to your time at Trellis, that we saw a lot and are still seeing are issues of food insecurity, transportation issues, housing insecurity, all of those wraparound services that really support an individual as they're going through a program. And just thinking about all of that, whether it's a short-term credential or a longer-term program, can you all talk a little bit about what could be in place? So we did a session a couple months back with Mark Sherry from Baylor Scott and White, and I'm blanking on her name, the superintendent of Del Valley ISD. And they were talking about how they created an apprenticeship in high school to go work at Baylor Scott and White. And it was a paid apprenticeship. They gave them I don't know if it was a whole 2 days or 2 half days, but it was intense. At the end of that, Mark was saying, he ended up offering jobs to something like 80 or 90% of them because he knew their work ethic. They wanted to invest in them. They wanted to continue to further and move them up. Thank you. It was Dr. Annette Telly. So thank you, Andrea, at Del Valley ISD. But the problem was, while they were in school, transportation was provided. When they finished and were offered the job, they couldn't accept it, because they couldn't get to the job. So I worry about these other pieces that Kasey is very familiar with around how do we support people or individuals who are struggling, whether there's somebody with some college, no credential, who could maybe come back and need one credit, Ray, one course. And then, or maybe it is a short-term credential of some sort that allows them to be able to get out of a sort of a cycle of poverty.
Sure. Well, I'm really glad you brought this up, because one of the things I've been thinking about recently is the connection of these alternative credential movements with the traditional student success work. And I think if we're going to meet the goals of the state, if we're going to maximize the opportunities that HBA provides for community colleges, and if the university and four-year public system wants to improve outcomes and work harder to make things affordable and make sure that ROI is there, we're going to have to concentrate on those students who are post-traditional, students with parents, students who are parents or caregivers, students with needs, security students who are working. And so I think it's really important for this alternative credentials to think about that. And so the first thing is integrating it into our courses and our curriculum, because those students who are already working, taking care of people, these opportunities to do outside credentialing and additional credentialing is going to be more of a burden to them. And so I think we need to track and make sure that the students who are utilizing these programs are broad, it's serving students that may most need them, and that it's, where appropriate, integrated into our courses. So we're doing a lot of work around that, integrating micro-credentialing into curriculum. And if we can focus on that, I think that's going to be really helpful for students. As far as those with some credit and no degree, we want to work to, reach back out, work with folks that have been studying these topics for a long time, like the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, and take their lessons and provide those opportunities to learn from them to our institutions. One thing Katharine said that was absolutely correct is that we have 9 academic institutions now with the introduction of Stephen F. Austin State University, and we have 5 health campuses, and they're all different, and they all serve different populations. And so it's important. What we want to make sure is that each institution has a strategy for micro-credentialing and for badging and for utilizing these services and for providing opportunities for faculty and the already existing student success and curriculum experts in our institutions to take this on and lead and in order to serve the most students we can.
Yeah, that's great. And Ray, I'm going to open this up to questions in just a minute. Ray, I wanted to circle back to something you said, and it's about, so many folks moving to Texas, and many of them are coming with skilled, but we have our own population here, minority, majority. And I want to make sure that with everything that we're doing, and I think you all agree with this, that we're creating opportunities for that population as well. And not just, well, somebody moved in from California, we're good. But how do we create those pathways for that population as well? And I'm sure the community colleges are doing a lot of outreach in that space, Ray.
We are. There's no question about that. We are mindful of the needs of all of our students. There's a report that was issued a year ago in January of last year by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And it was specific to community colleges here in Texas. It's actually still on their website. It's called All Eyes on Texas. And there's a lot to digest from that report, but one of the takeaways from that I've talked about in some presentations is the fact that the Dallas Fed report says that over the next 10 to 15 years, there'll be over 4 million new jobs created in Texas. And yes, while many of those new jobs are going to require a bachelor's degree or beyond, many are not. And what the Dallas Fed says is they're going to fall in this middle tier skill category. And it's folks that will need more than a high school diploma, but not necessarily all the way up to a 4-year degree. That is a sweet spot for community colleges. We're aware of that. That's one of the reasons why it was so imperative for us to change our funding model when we did last year. So we're definitely taking seriously this opportunity. We've seen an uptick in enrollment in the fall last semester's preliminary enrollment numbers for our community colleges, about a 3.5% increase across our sector compared to the previous academic year. All of that has to be factored in for all of our 50 community colleges so that we can be ready to help train and provide the skills for the generation of workers that we need in the state to keep our economic vibrancy going. We are leading the nation, not just in population growth, but in job growth. We want to keep that one, especially that second trend, the job growth one. We want to keep that one going.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go to a question that came in. The question is, who is determining what credentials are considered credentials of value? And is this causing institutions to stop offering some degree programs?
I'll jump in real quick and say that credentials of value is a term of art, and it is, our SHIO, our state higher education authority, is our Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. For those of you on this call who are not on this webinar that are not from Texas, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, through rulemaking, it looks at what is a credential of value, but they're doing it in close consultation with our community colleges. There's a brand new community college advisory committee that was created as a result of House Bill 8. So it's very much a collaborative partnership between our community colleges and the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I can't say enough positive things about the leadership of Commissioner Harrison Keller, who's my former boss, but I'm not on his payroll anymore, so I'm not required to say how great of a leader he is, but he really is doing a tremendous job for all of higher education, but has been a genuine, thoughtful partner for our community colleges. And no, we have not had to do anything with our programs. There is a calculation that's done, and there's a formula to it, but basically you look at a 10-year period and you look at the return on investment. What you're looking at is wage data for a particular credential that has been conferred over a 10-year period. You subtract what that credential cost, and you look at it compared to somebody with just a high school diploma. And if the wage data shows that credential is at a higher rate in terms of wage data than somebody with just a high school diploma, it is considered a credential of value. As we get better student level wage data over the coming years, we're going to be able to refine this formula even more. But so far, it certainly is working for this new formula, and it's done in a very collaborative process.
Well, and I think that 10-year, going back to Kasey's earlier comment, you can't just look at the first year or two out of school, right? Kasey, you were talking about the growth in income may happen over time, right?
Yeah, and we see that for a lot of majors. And so I would say, our strategy is exactly the opposite of removing programs. It's using those programs as the first line that we implement this sort of stuff. So with the Strata Foundation Beyond Completion grant that we participated in, all of our institutions looked at our CQT, which is something that the University of Texas system has publicly available, where you can search by program of study and see 1, 5, and 10 years of earnings outcomes. And they use that for their proposals to demonstrate those programs of study that have lower first year incomes, and for those borrowers that have a lower debt to income ratio. You know, the 10% of your monthly income towards your payment of student loan is, anything below that is what we want. And across our system, we are below that. But for particular programs that are above that, those are the ones we want to target with these sort of opportunities to demonstrate skills and improve those outcomes.
Right. And what we talked about with these credentials of value is really specific here in Texas, right, to measuring against House Bill 8 and what's put out there. But Katharine, thinking more globally or even just across the United States, I'm assuming, well, let me ask, that you would rely more on that ACE certification as opposed to, because who's to say Indiana is going to accept what Texas says is a credential of value? Can you shed any light on that?
Yeah, we definitely rely on a national accreditation to standardize all of ours. I will say it's a challenge meeting state by state. We received a question if we're aligned with TEAC standards, and we're like, we haven't even done the review. So I think it's definitely a state by state. I will say we have worked with Texas and the tri-agency workforce coalition, between Texas Workforce Commission, Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, and Texas Education Agency to identify sort of standards that could identify a credential of value. And we took a hard look at ourselves to make sure that we were in line with each of those standards. They're considering creating a credential library. I think it might actually be live. Those are separate from their certified list. Those are for people that are adult learners that wouldn't have access through a 2-year or 4-year university that are just looking out to brainstorm ideas. There are a number of resources, Strata and others, that have resources out there that we try to check the boxes in as many as possible. But that definitely is a moving target from the industry perspective and creators of the credentialing.
Yeah.
And if I could add, I would just say that, credentials of value may be a kind of a Texas term, and totally agree with Ray about it being an art that's going to have to change as we get more information. I will say that it was the Gates Post-Secondary Value Commission that did pull folks in from around the nation to think about this topic and come up with some definitions about, the lowest credential of value, which is where we're starting in Texas, but then also what are different ones that factor in economic mobility and things like that, intergenerational mobility. So there's a whole, I would recommend that folks that are interested in this topic go look at those and see what folks are thinking about when we're talking about the benefit of a higher education, because some of those also have to do with social issues. And let's not forget all of the programs of study that keep our society alive, like teaching and nursing and social work and all these things that we should be making credentials of value and careers of value. But even if they don't meet some of those initial goals, are essential for our society.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you brought up intergenerational economic mobility, because I don't think that gets looked at enough. But I think sometimes you don't see it in the first generation. You see it in the second. And then where going to college is just it's just accepted by the time you get to the third. It's not even a question. I am sorry to have to cut this conversation short. We are over time. We could go on for quite some time, and I'd love to continue this conversation at another point. But Ray, Kasey, Katharine, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that our audience enjoyed this conversation as well. I certainly did, and look forward to continuing it. Katharine will go to DC in June, and we'll do some advocacy work with the chamber. And Kasey, always interested in hearing your insights. And Ray, just congratulations on all the work you've done behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, everywhere, and your team for House Bill 8. I do think you're right. It is landmark legislation that's going to change the way things operate here in Texas and perhaps in other states. Don't we like to do it first in Texas and then have people follow?
Why not?
Isn't there a what starts here changes the world?
Yeah. What's that from?
Yeah. So
Thank
thank you
Debra.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
all
everyone.
very much.
Thanks,
Really
everyone.